Thanks to each and every one of you who have reached out and for your support of this project so far. It really means a lot to me. This is episode number 1. Today we're going to find out about the drinking water in Metro Vancouver, why the T-Rex and the Stegosaurus could never have fought each other, and how your poop ends up in the medicine you take and the food that you eat. Jarrid and I met 18 years ago while attending the same program at college. As life happens to get in the way sometimes, we've only seen each other a handful of times since. However, I've always found him extremely easy to talk to, and I hope after watching this, you understand why. So please sit back and enjoy my conversation with Jarrid Jenkins. I appreciate you taking the time anyways for this project. I know it was sort of an odd request, but
Oh, it's fun. It's different and wasn't expecting it, and so that just makes it that much more enjoyable. And
but we met at a BCIT program for new media and design. So a very techie program.
Yeah.
Correct. And yet all of your jobs since then have involved sciences, for lack of better term.
Right. Science and engagement, science outreach.
Yeah, I'm curious if you just learned a lot about yourself as the years went by, and realized that the stuff you went to BCIT for was never really for you, or I'm curious what intrigued you and what enticed you to sign up for that program to begin with, if you can remember. I mean,
are you sitting down? You want a story? Is that what you're asking?
I do. I'm sitting down and I do want a story. That's sort of the purpose of this. It's just, it's so, like, if I look at myself and know why I signed up for it and what I saw my trajectory to be leaving that program, and I wouldn't say that I followed the trajectory that I thought, but I do feel like I did use the knowledge and experience that I gained there for a number of years, and even still to this day. I'm curious what trajectory you saw that would have led you to sign up for that program, and then how that has diverted into everything else that you've done. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I've got a lot of questions that I'm very curious about, but this is definitely one of them.
All right. In the beginning. So when I moved out to Vancouver, it was because so going way back when I went to university,
once upon a time, Jarrid was born, and
I went straight to university at a birth. But I went and got my education degree and a fine arts degree. So that was kind of my I guess my career choice at that point. But then partway through my education and getting my education degree, I ended up getting a job with Alberta Parks, and my concept of what education was or what education could be shifted, because I was seeing people engaging in learning opportunities. Like, you go out to Dinosaur Park and you go on a bus trip and you learn about the geology of the place and the history and how fossils form, and then you go see fossils and you might get a chance to go look for fossils, and there's a story about, like, why are all these dinosaurs dead and in this one space, this one location. So so the idea of using my education skills as an engagement tool for kind of connecting to people who wanted to be there shifted this idea of what I thought education could be. And I really got excited about this idea of experiential education. And so I spent about 7 seasons working out at Dinosaur, and the last ones were longer. I was a supervisor and so on, engaging with this new concept and approach, but then realizing, like, Dinosaur Park, which is not the same as Drumheller, and I will give you advice on both.
And we're going to get back to that because that's one of my questions. So
they are both worth visiting. If you're going to make a visit, you should wrap them all in there. But we'll get back to that. But anyway, so when I went to BCIT, it was because I was looking at what Dinosaur Park had to offer, and from an education perspective, if you want to engage anybody, like almost anybody, you pull out a dinosaur fossil, and people are like, "Oh, what?" Like, it's just it just pulls you in, right? So if you want to talk about geology or sedimentation or fossil formation or biology or ecology or anything, you bring dinosaurs into that conversation, suddenly people are paying attention, because it's about like, well, the dinosaurs were living in what kind of space? They were doing what was happening? So super engaging. But Dinosaur Park was quite far from a lot of schools. And so this thing called the internet had recently hatched. In 1997, I got to send my first email. And so it was like 4 years later that I ended up registering at BCIT. So the internet was exploding. As you know, we went through the .com bubble and burst and everything. But this idea of like how can I get Dinosaur Park into a format where people can access it from different locations? And that was the idea of like, okay, well, I spent a lot of time with parks and there's no full-time jobs on the table here. So in the meantime, why don't I go and improve myself? And Vancouver's awesome. So why don't I go check that out? And that's what led me to apply for this program at BCIT. I did a master's at UBC, looking at informal education and teacher education and how those two systems could work together to increase the ability for teachers to be more engaging right from the get-go. But then I started working with the Stanley Park Ecology Society. Like,
can you explain that informal formal education piece just a little bit more?
Yes, like what I meant, or
both. I mean, I think I know what you mean. I don't want to sound stupid by saying what I think I meant or what you meant.
Even though you could edit it.
I could edit it. What I think you mean is that that there's so much stock still put into formal education, whether it's a bachelor's, a master's, a degree of some sort, and that doesn't discount the fact that you could learn the same information on your own and not get the piece of paper, right? And you can learn them in different ways, and you could go to university and have that structured setting with 200 people in a classroom with a professor in front of you going blah blah blah, or you could decide that you want to create these instructional materials. In order to do that, you would have to do the research yourself anyways. You would basically self-directed learning, and ultimately you would have the same knowledge or similar knowledge enough to say, I've earned a whatever degree in this discipline, but it's not recognized because you didn't go through the formal process. Am I anywhere close? Or
you're totally skating with it. I like that.
I'm adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like that you took it up into this kind of the idea of the degrees, and it's I think that's an interesting point. I think before I move to that though, I'll just go back to that. Yeah, that informal versus formal. Basically, the formal is like you said, the classroom, this traditional structure of education where you've got the sage on the stage is the phrase that we often use, right? Like the source of information. I'm the teacher. I know. I transmit. You guys spit back.
Sure.
That's kind of traditional education. It's changing a lot as time goes on, and our understanding of what is important. Is it important that your kid knows who signed the whatever treaty in 1804? Do they ever use that again in their life? Or is it more important that if the kid is like, I am super curious about the treaties in my area, this is the way that I know from experience and from being a learner and being aware of how I learn and where I can learn, that I can go to this place and this place and this place, I can talk to this person, I can find out that information and so on. So often, that's the more informal education, right? It's the rest of your life. You learn every day of your life.
Yeah.
You don't not learn if you don't have somebody saying the answer is B or whatever, right? So
sure. Yeah.
So that's kind of the informal, formal, and then sites of informal education like museums, generally parks, science centers, aquariums, etc. They can add to and augment the content that often gets delivered in formal education. So you can go and look at a textbook and watch a couple videos on YouTube and understand and learn, about how intelligent a beluga whale is. Or you could go into a place like the Vancouver Aquarium and you can take that same knowledge, but then go down and sit and have an eye-to-eye contact with a beluga whale and see them looking at you and playing with you at the window and get a totally different understanding of the intelligence of these animals and their social interactions and how they perceive you, etc. Right? So it's like it's another level or another dimension of engagement and ways to engage that you don't necessarily get in a formal environment, and that unless you are a very talented teacher or a teacher who's put a lot of thought into the engagement process and how I can engage these kids, you often will not have as much of that engaging stuff in there, especially when you have like a curriculum driven content that you need to I'm in front of you. Okay, it's week 28. We should have already covered integers by now. So
sure,
those kinds of things, right? So and my background is education, and I've always been interested in where those two meet. So like I had said earlier, when I was working at Parks, while doing my education degree, I saw a different version of what education looks like, or what I had been hearing about in my formal education training, and seeing people who were actually like lined up to find out more, who came into these programs and were like, oh, I've got to, adults, grandparents, kids, all hands in the air. What about this? Why is that? Like they were just free accessing and absorbing information. So and that actually ended up shifting where I went to with my other jobs as well.
Okay.
So I was working at the Stanley Park Ecology Society shortly after I left the aquarium. Well, I basically jumped ship, and I started working at the Ecology Society as their public programs manager about 14 days after the massive windstorm of 2006, when all the trees in that park blew down. And my first day of work, I couldn't get to work. I had to walk over trees or under trees in order to get to the Stanley Park Ecology Society, and became involved in the same thing, informal education, public engagement, and working with that organization, because I didn't know much about West Coast ecology. I didn't know everything about the ocean either, but they paid better than working at the aquarium.
Right.
And I'd been at the aquarium for a couple of years, and it was limited vertical movement that was available for me in my program area. So
I mean, unless you're going to be a marine biologist, there's probably little room to go up at the aquarium, right?
Well, that's just it. My manager had just been hired, so she'd been there for 10 years, and then she got hired as the manager. So he wasn't going anywhere. This was her goal, so she made that.
Fair enough.
So just wasn't interested in finding other ways to stick at the aquarium, especially not for low fee and then the same commute. And I could be working with the Stanley Park Ecology Society. That was suddenly thrust into the spotlight in Vancouver, because everyone's favorite tree had fallen down. The
park was closed.
That should have been destroyed a million years ago, damaged. People were crying. Like it was quite an emotional time, but it also was this incredible opportunity for the organization to become a key player in helping inform the restoration work that had to be done to save the forest and to make sure we didn't end up with a whack of even more invasive species than are already living in that park. So that became this thing where I was like, it's a whole new world for me to explore. My brain is happy and it pays better than that. So let's go for it. So
I remember that. It was one of the first times I remember the city sort of coming together for a unified goal, right? I mean, I remember, going to deposit a check at the bank, and there was a bank account set up for community donations and
for the park.
And
because they got like $12 million, $9 million. So I can't remember what the number was. It was like
in like a month, super quick. And it's good. I mean, I don't live in downtown Vancouver, but we enjoy, walking around the seawall and getting a hot dog, one of our favorite
internationally known.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And it's funny because a lot lot of people mention Central Park as the most famous park, and that's in a major city, right, New York. And it, the fact that the city in New York is built around the park is different from Stanley Park in the sense that it's sort of an amoeba off to the side, accessible from the downtown core. But Stanley Park is about 4 times bigger than Central Park,
Right. Yeah. Just the
right?
sheer size of
The
it.
sheer size. Yeah, I think it's about 1,500 acres or hectares versus like 400.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you. I do those numbers at one time.
Yeah,
If you had
no, it's
paid me
okay.
enough money, I would have taken you for a walk and told you that fact. But
Oh, okay. Well,
you missed
this
your window, man.
this project pays exactly zero,
Right.
so far the information has been worth what I've
Right.
paid.
Exactly. I've gotten everything I expected. Oh, I have a trivia bit for you. The
Oh,
connection
okay.
between Central Park and Stanley Park. So I think it was, and I could be wrong. I think it's about 1914 or 1904. I think there was a 4 in there, something right around the turn of the century. There was a
That
delegation
Lord
that came.
Lord Stanley.
No, well, this was after Lord Stanley. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But there was a delegation that came up from New York, and so they gifted Vancouver and Stanley Park a couple pairs of eastern gray squirrels.
Oh, lovely. So they're the reason that I have insulation issues in my
So all
attic.
those gray and black squirrels that rip around the lower mainland
Awesome.
are all from that same original stock that was brought as a gift back
Oh,
when we didn't think about what happens if I unleash this brand new animal into this environment.
it's
At
like
that
that.
time, they brought it in, and now they're everywhere in the lower mainland. So
It's like that episode of The Simpsons where they go to
yeah,
Australia and Bart brings the bullfrog.
exactly. Yeah, and they go through the whole series of what invasive animal that
Yeah.
brings to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Okay.
last one was the I use that analogy all the time when I talk about invasive species, but it was that idea of
The squirrel or the bullfrog from The Simpsons?
when I talk about, because when I was working with Alberta Parks, we talked about invasive species as well, but I use that Simpsons analogy all the time, and I would talk about, at the end they'd be like, well, how do we control that? And I said, well, we're going to get a special kind of gorilla that likes to come in and beat those snakes to death, or the fish, or whatever the invasive species is.
Yeah.
And said, and then we don't have to worry about anything because when the winter comes, it'll kill them.
Nice.
And then people
And
just stare at you like,
plus, then we'll
okay,
have gorillas around. So.
it's a Simpsons reference. It's just the
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I touched on that one a couple of times. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. On that note, I was
Yeah.
very proud of myself that I did remember this on my own, but when reading through the notes that you sent me, um, I did remember that you had worked on the Metro Vancouver water supply, or
Mm-hmm.
specifically the drinking water supply.
Yeah.
And I would love to know what you did, what information you would like to convey, because I remember having a conversation about this, um, probably when we were skiing,
Yeah. Yeah. No
uh,
doubt.
and how um, the majority of people just they don't even think about it, and the reservoirs are there, and they don't realize that a couple drops of the wrong thing just contaminate the whole thing, and how important it is to keep that system intact. So this is your stage. My one viewer is just chomping at the bit
Dying.
to
Dying to know it.
just dying to
Yeah.
know what we need to know about the drinking water system in Vancouver and first world countries and
Absolutely.
beyond. So
Absolutely. Well,
everybody,
I,
Jarrid Jenkins, once again, water expert.
the job I was hired for was outreach, basically a drinking water outreach coordinator for Metro Vancouver. So it was looking at, and this is one of the things I think I was probably extremely passionate about it when I first, like when you and I went out and had our ski, and when I was probably telling you about this, which is probably why you remember it, but it was just amazing to me because I realized up until that point, I had given very little thought about what it took for me to be able to live in Vancouver with 600,000 other people, like in Vancouver proper, much less the Metro Vancouver region and the 3 point whatever million people that live in that area, right? I never thought about like how do I get my water? What happens when I flush? It's just not a thought that crosses your mind. You just take it for granted. It's there. It is what it is, and that's where we are. And And why would you question it unless something was wrong, right? For everything. Like, I'm sure if you're a homeowner and I got a clog in a pipe somewhere, then suddenly I'm aware about the infrastructure that's required there. So it was a pretty neat job for me to take, like to have as an individual, because once again, I was engaged. I was learning about this incredible, like the history of the place and how Vancouver formed and why it formed, and I learned about why the CPR terminated in Vancouver instead of up at Port Moody, and it was all about the graft, baby, and like the history and how that town, how that Lower Mainland formed and developed, and then how this couple different organizations came together. One was bringing water over from Capilano and into the downtown core, and helped eliminate all this disease because everybody was peeing and pooing 15 feet away from the well, whatever kind of stuff, and dying with diphtheria and whatever kind of stuff, right? So it was I just was like, oh, I'd never considered all this before or never realized it before. And then as the place grew, these 3 closed watersheds that are up in the mountains, which makes like the Vancouver water, Metro Vancouver water, some of the cleanest water in the world. Like it's some of the highest grade quality. It hardly needs any treating because it sits in those great big deep lakes and it settles out. And when that water comes down, you have to put hardly any chemicals in it or do much to treat it or filter it. So it was pretty amazing. And from growing up in Brooks, Alberta, I mean, I'm way far downstream from Canmore and Calgary and every little town in between there. So there's a lot of recycled water in that supply there, right? So, so Vancouver was kind of paradise for that. And then I got to do these programs where I was taking groups of kids who were being subsidized by Metro Vancouver as part of their outreach program. So their focus was like, let's engage with kids so that they understand where this comes from, so they don't end up as a old man washing their sidewalk every Saturday with perfectly good drinking water, or scrubbing off the winter's mildew off of my driveway or whatever, right? Like it's just this reframing and helping kids to grow up understanding that the resource they've been gifted because they were born in the right place or they live in the right place. So so it's pretty amazing. And then to go up into these closed watersheds where it's like there are some roads up there and there's not much more. There's bear and there's deer and there's cougars and these amazing places, and it's a natural system that they were slowly learning to try to manage less. Because of course people walk in and they're like, well, we got to manage this. Cut all the trees down and manage it. And it's like, amazingly, that forest was doing just fine.
Yeah, for like a billion years or so.
Before you decided to come up and manage it. So
in the last 50 years, we need human intervention.
Exactly. Thank goodness. So then the conversation with that was also about you became aware of the politics of water, right? So who gets access to how much water, how much has to be left for the communities that were further downstream, like when you get out to Langley and so on, like all the communities in between there who are also signed on to the water or for the wastewater treatment or whatever the service was at Metro Vancouver. That was pretty cool. It was a pretty interesting opportunity. But then we got to do things like engage high school kids. So I got to develop a high school education program, a science program right at the Seymour Capilano filtration plant in the Lower Seymour Conservation Reserve. So this like bleeding edge, top grade, awesome facility with incredible systems and technology employed, as well as all these like super smart people that were working in this environment, all just to make sure we had safe water at the other end of the tap. And so it was working with all these neat people in this neat space and developing this program. So that was cool. It was like I got to develop something, engage kids here. So that was pretty cool. And then they got to learn about like not only how much work goes into treating the sewage that we create before it goes out into the environment, and everyone was like, oh, but Victoria, it's pumped out directly into the ocean. I'm like, yes, Victoria, it's very nasty. But that's not what we do. We treat it, and then it goes out. But then it was also reframing the conversation around, okay, well, like what's wastewater? Because there was these really neat programs where there was a project where they were basically causing nitrogen and phosphates to come out of solution from the wastewater to be packaged and sold as fertilizer. because that's where all of the fertilizer you put on your food that you eat ends up with is in that food. You eat it, you pee it out, you poo it out, whatever, and then but it's actually a resource. So there were people who were trying to figure out, how do I mine this wastewater stream? And then there were guys that were contacting Metro Vancouver that are like, look, we want to grow massive algae fields out in the ocean just off the shore.
Yeah.
The nutrients you've got locked up in this sludge are perfect for keeping that algae fed, and we can turn that algae into vitamins, into nutritional supplements, into medicines, into oil and gas supplements. Like this technology that was like, so you want to engage kids, introduce them to poop. But then
my kids are all over the poop.
Exactly.
For different reasons than this right now, but
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that is fascinating.
It's super interesting. It was a super interesting place to work.
Okay, so on that note, Drumheller or Dinosaur Park, which is better? And I'd never heard of Dinosaur Park. I've only heard Drumheller, and call me uneducated. Geography is not my strong suit. I just happen to know a number of people that have gone to Drumheller, recommend it for the dinosaur lover and everybody.
Yeah.
And that's been our plan. But
I would suggest hitting Dinosaur Park first, and then going back through Drumheller on the way to like, so there's camping out at Dinosaur Park.
Okay.
I don't recommend trying to get a camping site on a weekend. You can reserve ahead if you want, but I would suggest that you hit Dinosaur Park and you do a camp overnight if you can, or find like the local hotel or whatever kind of stuff, because there's a number of things you can do with the boys. Like you can go out and roam the hoodoos and the Badlands on your own. It's the largest section of Badlands in Canada. It's well worth planning just time to go hike around. And there's camping down in there, and it's great. It's a great place to be. It's a neat place to go visit. But the programs you can go on, there's a couple of them. So one of them is the Centrosaurus bone bed hike, and you go to this spot where there's like 300 dinosaurs, all of one species, and all a bunch of different age ranges that have all died in this one layer. And so you see this massive fossil bed with all these big dinosaur fossils, right? That give you, if your kids like dinosaurs or they've ever seen any dinosaur movies, it's like, wow, like that's it. That's the stuff right there. And it's just everywhere. And then when you go to the Royal Tyrrell in Drumheller is like evolution, right? So boom, big bang. This is what it looks like. It looked like the first 3 billion years, and then this is when life starts to deviate, and they have fossils for almost all of those major geological timeframes. And your brain will be full in about half an hour. Like there is so much stuff to look at. But the majority of their dinosaur exhibits that are on display there, the majority of them will have a little found in Dinosaur Provincial Park. Like Dinosaur Park is one of the top 3 sites in the world for dinosaur diversity and number of species in one location. So when you go
Dinosaur
to Drumheller,
Dinosaur Park is a fossil gold mine.
Yeah.
And Drumheller is the display of that.
Drumheller is the dinosaur museum. So they do have fossils in their Badlands there. They're on the same river system. They have a cute little strip of Badlands along the river. It's nothing compared to Dinosaur.
Okay.
And they're towards the end of the Cretaceous, the end of dinosaur time frame. So they have a lot less species there and a lot less fossils found. Just a different depositional environment, different time frame. So good place to put. But what's happened to dinosaurs is in, was it like 1993 that Jurassic Park came out?
Yeah.
And the people's awareness and knowledge, although there's so much wrong stuff in those movies, but their awareness and knowledge of dinosaurs on like an international level shot through the roof. My first year at Dinosaur Park was in 1994. And we saw double the visitation from the year before that year. So we went from like 40,000 to 80,000 people or something like that in 1 year. Like it was phenomenal. Nobody was prepared for it.
You said in 1994 that Dinosaur Park saw a doubling of tourists.
Yeah.
Just as a guesstimation, your best guess, how many of those people do you think thought they were coming to Jurassic Park?
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know. I don't know.
That the movie was a documentary.
Yeah, exactly. We had like, there are so many conversations that you had with people that year that were like, well, so would the T-Rex have attacked like a stegosaurus like that? And I'm like, there was a great infographic that was going around like last year or 2 years ago or whatever, but it was basically on the dinosaur timeline. That said the T-Rex was actually closer to you on that
Okay.
dinosaur timeline than it was to the stegosaurus.
Like they didn't live in the same time.
Stegosaurus is back here in the Jurassic,
Okay.
beginning of the Jurassic. 100 million years later, the Cretaceous,
Yeah.
and at the end of that, the T-Rex, 65 million years ago. So there's like 120 million years between these two dinosaurs that were chilling out together in Jurassic Park.
Right.
And there's, there's only 65 million years difference between you and me and when the T-Rex was roaming around in North America. So you constantly had this like, well, but the movie, or like, but Jurassic Park, like I've seen that movie several times, and so I feel like I should correct you when you're saying, whatever kind of stuff, right? So
yeah,
you had, what it started was the rise of the armchair expert.
All right, I'm gonna give you a couple quick questions, then we're gonna wrap up because
right.
I've clearly taken a lot of your time, and I definitely appreciate it. And like you said, there's always tomorrow. So
Absolutely, I love to hear my voice anytime. So.
don't we all?
Yeah.
All right. So, what podcast do you recommend the most?
Well, there's that like, is it 99% visible?
99% visible?
Invisible.
Invisible.
Yeah. So it's like a design one. So I really like the concept of.
What was your worst job ever? You've had a few, but what was the worst one?
One summer I spent a week working on there was a fall actually, freezing cold fall, and I spent a week working on a potato grater. So potato grater is the machine that pulls potatoes up out of the farmer's field, basically spits them out onto a conveyor belt, and then they go up a conveyor belt,
cleans them up, and
the deck, and they dump into the truck that drives along beside the grater.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of people that sit up on top, and they basically grade the potatoes. So you're basically like, what's good, and you look for anything that's terrible or rotten or been cut by the blade or whatever, something that's not gonna be able to sell on a shelf.
Right.
And the worst thing is grabbing a rotten potato, like a potato that way we got missed last year. And so the shell, it looks like a potato, but then you grab it and it just goes, and just your gloves are covered in this like green, gross, like Ghostbusters, and it stinks, right? So that was one really terrible job. What about you? What was your worst ever?
My worst job ever. I worked for about 6 weeks at a plant that converted biodegradable waste into pig feed. And my job was, so the compost trucks would come in and they would just dump the stuff in the middle of this room, and then you had to shovel, and then there was a bobcat would come and scoop it up and put it in the furnace, and in this tub of brine and gooey goodness. And of course a pile of compost waste oozes, right? And so my job was to take a squeegee that was about 3 feet wide and to just squeegee the pile back into a unit that the bobcat could then scoop up. And oh man, like 3 showers later after a shift, and you still, like, you could taste it, right? It just so bad, but
good for you though.
Only worked there for about 6 weeks, but I was, like I said, 17, 18 years old, and I was making 14 or 15 bucks an hour.
Nice.
Huge
living
money.
At home.
Oh yeah, like huge money, right? Like all my friends working at McDonald's for $7 an hour. I'm thinking it's worth it, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, so she, nobody cared if I stunk. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely.
It's great catching up with you.
For sure. Okay, well, enjoy. And I think this project you're taking on is neat. I like the idea of it. I told Amy, my wife, about it when it came
Thanks.
up. So
Yeah.
good work.
Yeah.
Way to find yourself something to do in the
There we go.
pandemic. So
I gotta have something.
yeah, exactly.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Okay. We'll catch you later.
All right. See ya.
Okay.